It was 1 a.m. The wind was howling outside. It was pitch black, left for the light of my headlamp. My bag almost immediately weighed down on my shoulder the moment I put it on. For the night before, we booked a mountain hut that was pretty far away from the summit by mistake. We were told it would take at least 3 hours of trekking to get there. I started shivering in the cold. I pulled a mask over my nose in an attempt to warm the numbing cold air that rushed in with every breath. One heavy footstep after another, we started the push for the summit of Mount Fuji. Three hours and a half left before the sun made its majestic comeback over the horizon. We were like K-pop fans rushing to the broadcast station to see our idols in the flesh. Whether our wish would be fulfilled, only time would tell. I was hopeful we would submit before the sun rose because it had been my husband's long-time wish to watch the sunrise at the top of Mount Fuji. There were a million thoughts swirling in my mind. Why do we do this to ourselves? What would I trade to get a hot shower and a nice, clean bed right now? Since when did my kind of traveling become so physically intense? As a kid, my kind of traveling used to be drinking fresh coconuts on the beach with my parents and messing my brother's sandcastles. When summer was in and school was out, my parents used to take me and my brother to different beaches in Vietnam for a few days. We did touristy things. It didn't matter much what we did. It was more of being able to experience things together. Even as a kid, the few days of traveling felt like a sweet break from the mundane day to day. It always filled me with regret when it was time to go home. Even when I started traveling without my family as an adult, that feeling didn't fundamentally change. Each trip was a short break from adulting. Every day was filled with new places to discover, new experiences to live, and new food to try. Suddenly, I became generous with my spending because I wanted to try it all. I could eat 5 to 6 meals and walk 15,000 steps per day to go places because if not now, then when? But sometimes, while I was in my happy-go-lucky state, at the back of my mind, I knew I was traveling on borrowed time. More often than I would like to admit, my thoughts would drift to that product requirement document I hadn't completed before going on leave. I sometimes replayed an uncomfortable work conversation and dreaded the thought of having to follow up once I was back. I had crazy urges to check my work messages to the extent that I uninstalled work messaging apps before going on leave. Even as I returned to the present, those looming thoughts left a bad taste in my mouth that traveling was a high I would eventually crash from. It made me wonder, why did I travel? Maybe it was more than a little innocent break. I was running away from the heavy shackles of work responsibilities and my own expectations. I was seeking a fleeting relief that would leave me with a withdrawal syndrome when it was all over. But was I a little too dramatic? Maybe it's normal to go through this kind of highs and lows in life. Without the lows, how do I appreciate the highs? I mean, nobody can take a break forever, can they? One gotta work, feed oneself, and have some purpose in life. So I did the only sane thing there was to do to find out. Quit my job, to take as much time as I want, to travel. See for myself how does traveling feel when there are no Monday blues await. These thoughts intruded into my mind as I was inching my way to the peak of Mount Fuji. We had just climbed past the 8th station, where the Subashiri trail we were hiking is merged with the popular Yoshida trail, with hikers from both trails falling into a single line. There was a traffic jam. Every 2 steps we took, we would have to stop for 5 minutes. Stuck in a queue, I was freezing in my own sweat, and the wind was eager to hurl me off. Behind us, The sky has turned the shade of peach blossom. The sun was already there somewhere. Any moment now, the curtain of clouds would draw and the sun would spring itself into the spotlight before a lot of us managed to flock to the vantage point. I was worried we would miss out on the beautiful sunrise at the top, but I was forced to go with the flow. And then I realized this was the exact lesson I was struggling to learn during this trip to Japan. It was the first trip taken in this new context where I technically can travel for as long as I want, but I chose to travel for 2 weeks and still managed to jam pack these 2 weeks with a long itinerary. There were a period where I changed city every 2 to 3 days. I would say taking a career break to travel doesn't automatically rewind your mindset to slow down. It takes some serious conscious effort to say no to all the other possibilities of excitement and focus your experience on a few things. At the end of a day trip to Kyoto, after a long day of walking in the boiling heat, my husband asked me at dinner if I wanted to visit a famous night market nearby. I was very tempted because we only had one day in Kyoto and who knows when would I return to this place. But to be honest, my enjoyment has reached diminishing return. Visiting one more famous place wouldn't add much to my experience since I was already so exhausted. Being physically forced to slow down in the queue to the peak made me reflect on how fast and furious my pace of traveling had been. It could work well if I treated these 2 weeks as a complete escape from my normal life. Everything I usually do, like resistance training, going for runs, working on this very podcast, can wait while I'm on a break. But had this trip been longer than 2 weeks, it would have been impossible for me to disconnect like that. When I was on a train traveling between destinations, I found myself wondering, should I use this time to brainstorm for the next podcast episode? Or should I look out of the window and enjoy the sight in front of me? Here we go. Another example of how staying in the moment takes serious effort. If I travel for months on end, when traveling becomes the lifestyle, my theory is it is best to compartmentalize time to work on other life priorities from time to experience a place. My suggestions to my husband is to spend 2 days a week not being on the move, working on some other things we care about like exercising and recording for podcasts. This is so that we can actually focus on experiencing the place we are at with full attention. Right here, right now, on the way up Mount Fuji, I got to literally go with the flow. And I realized it's okay. Because every time I turned around, the sight of what I left behind got clearer. The veil of darkness slowly lifted, revealing the tranquil beauty of the area around Mount Fuji, bit by bit. The surprise of seeing such a beautiful sight broke my chance of chaotic thoughts, and I was humbled. Sometimes we have such a narrow focus on the destination that we forget there is much beauty along the way. Suddenly, the line of hikers sped up, as if accelerated by an invisible force. The quiet dawn became rhythmic, with a chorus of clicks and clacks when trekking poles hit on big rocks. We submitted at 4:30 a.m., exactly 3.5 hours after departure. We squeezed ourselves into a tiny gap along the barricade where other hikers had lined up to welcome the sunrise. Excitement was bubbling in the air. Some people had set up time-lapse mode on their cameras to capture the sky ripening like Jeju tangerines in autumn. Some people had brought their country's flags, which whipped through the air in the relentless wind. Others just stood there quietly, hugging themselves a little more tightly to keep warm, while gazing at the sky in anticipation. At 4:45 a.m., a tiny egg yolk bobbed up over the horizon. It grew bigger into a glowing fireball, blazing the surrounding clouds with orange light. As the fireball levitated, The whole sky lit up with hundreds of light rays, piercing through the air, lighting up every corner on the ground, and blew a breath of life into everyone's heart. Yes, as all my senses were awakened, I felt alive. Yet, at the same time, I felt so small and humbled. The sun has risen and set every day in its majestic way, undisturbed by the happenings of the human world. In no time, the sun became so bright that one could no longer look at it directly. That fleeting window of breaking dawn makes the experience all the more precious. Suddenly I felt like the journey up here was worth every step. That's when I thought, this is why I travel. Not to escape, but to seek. To seek out moments to be in awe of the beauty this world offers. To seek out feelings that cannot be replicated through the screen. The whipping wind, the ache in my legs, the warmth of the sun on my face. To feel alive. How about you? Why do you travel?